Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today. And it's really my honor um, to share with you on this topic. And I would like to just start out sharing a little bit about who I am. My name is Lana Paul, and my company is Lighting the Way. And it is my passion to be able to inspire the light within you in whatever way that you need. And the reason that I feel very passionate about this topic and these conversations is that I grew up in a family where I was a product, as an adult, I was a product of the relationships that I had as a child, and especially my mom and my dad. And there were patterns that I learned that came into being very early in life before I was even verbal. Um, but I was number 5 out of 6 kids. And so I think my parents were a little tired, but my mother also had postpartum depression, and she wasn't able to take care of me and as a newborn. And so that care fell on my sister, and she did a really good job. But then she left for school because she was only 10, so her job was to be in school. And so I then kind of experienced some abandonment, probably, I would say, from that point. And those things have carried forward. There was a lot of anger in my household. There was loss of safety, which we'll be talking about some today because of what all's gone on in the last year. Many of us, especially our children, have experienced a loss of safety. And so as I became an adult, I was with my ex-husband for 23 years. And there were a lot of problems in the relationship, and on his side, but also on mine. And that's what I came to realize. And after the divorce, I felt like I was on top of the world. Like I had done so much work on myself and really thought, I'm ready. I'm healthy. I'm going to have this great next relationship. And what I found out is that some of the friendships and some of the men that I was meeting, they just met the same patterns, and I was like flabbergasted that these patterns existed. So I know that that in our family, my ex-husband and I, we have 2 children that are teenage girls, and we've both made a lot of mistakes. We really both brought forward into that family patterns from our past. So that's why I do what I do, and that's why I'm here with you today. So I hope that what we talk about is helpful. And I want to just welcome you all and just recognize that how awesome of parents you are, that you're wanting the best for your children. And if you're anything like me, you probably want to shield your children from worry and heartache. And unfortunately, we cannot protect them from every fear or dangerous situation, but we can protect them from the pitfalls of avoiding emotional pain and grief. We are talking today about what gets in the way of being able to help our children. And many of us were not taught that within our own selves that it was okay to feel whatever we were feeling. And sometimes we, like what happened with me, sometimes we are adults who actually have unresolved grief within us. So I would like for you each just to take a moment and really drop down into your heart and take a minute to reflect on your childhood lives. And this will help you a little bit move into imagining life through the eyes of your children. So close your eyes if you want. And there are a few things that your parents put into your belief system that might not be serving you. And it might not be serving your family now. It's common to have wished that some things had been different during your childhood. Things like more time with your parents, more structure, or you wish they had been less strict or less overbearing. Many wish they had received more affection or protection from abuse. Time comes into play because sometimes we wish they hadn't been late all the time, or that they weren't always so punctual. You may have wished that you had been raised with better nutrition. You may have dealt with explosive anger in your home or been taught to become a people pleaser, or there could have been alcoholic dysfunctional behavior in your home. Maybe you have had that thought that I am turning into mom, or I sound just like dad. You can open your eyes if they're closed. All of this isn't all bad, but there may be a couple of beliefs or habits that you may or may hope that you do not pass on to your children. And part of what we will do today is talk about our belief system around grief, loss, and resilience. You may discover that you have emotional baggage you are still carrying around. And if so, if you want to have a deeper conversation around that, you can let me know, and I'm happy to talk to you. Grief it's just been off limits most of our lives, and it's misunderstood. And often what we've been taught is actually hurtful or wrong. What we are talking about today is about an emotional survival technique. And imagine people all over the world are grieving because of this last year. So this is a technique that really all of us could use. Okay, I am going to share my screen now. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's a purple screen. Oh, it just started snowing here. Okay.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so again, we're here today to talk about helping our children in the COVID-19 age. And we are going to talk about let's see if I get this to move. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about the goals for today's talk. We're going to define grief because we use an expanded version of the grief definition. It's more than just death. And we're going to talk about the reasons grief is misunderstood, identify ways that unresolved grief might impact youth or adults, and discuss the source of their grief, our grief, and identify ways to relieve some of the grief we carry, because that's our goal. Okay. So the first definition is that grief is the normal and natural reaction to a change or loss of any kind. So we can call it all sorts of names if we want, but it's still grief. It's stress, burnout, PTSD, complicated grief, depression. It's the reaction, it's the feelings that we have as a result of being hurt. It's the reactions we have to trauma. Grief is also the response to a change in or an end in any familiar pattern of behavior. It is also about mixed emotions. So we can feel grief when there are graduations or when we move, when there are births, loss of addiction, and even in death. Another definition is that feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there for you, only to find out that when you need them one more time, they're not there. Or reaching out for someone who's never been there for you, only to find out that when you need them one more time, they're still not there. And what causes grief? We go many things cause grief, and we go through life picking up rocks, and the rocks are the hurts. The rocks are the emotions that have come from the traumas, and this begins in childhood. And we aren't really taught how to deal with them, but those rocks come in all sizes. So they could be little pebbles, they could be stones, they could be rocks, boulders, like all sizes, because everything affects us differently. And as we age, we do not usually have the tools to do anything about these losses over those years. And so what's happened is all of those rocks have been accumulating in an empty backpack that really is, if you imagine, just stitched to our backs. And so one stone just keeps piling in. And here are some examples of some things that can represent those stones that we get put into our backpack. And especially in this last year, if you think about our children and what they've gone through, they did not know what to do with a pandemic, right? I would imagine early on they felt a loss of safety, and they felt very isolated. And the school, right, went to virtual. Oh, we'll be back, and then no, we're not going back. And then activities were canceled, and kindergarten graduations canceled, middle school graduations canceled, all of the graduations canceled, or some did get changed into other ways, but trips got canceled, things that our children were invested in projects, in their social time. All of those changes have taken place. And there are other things that cause grief as well. We call them intangible losses. So we've talked about loss of safety. There's loss of security. There's loss of trust. So loss of trust can come into play in many ways, like with our parents. I remember when I was younger, when my dad would always be angry, I didn't trust him. I didn't feel safe in his care. I was not secure. There can be a loss of respect. A loss of faith often is there because we don't understand sometimes how God could allow certain things to happen. And then there are the hopes, dreams, and expectations that we have in relationships. And sometimes those are dashed. And our normal, right? Our normal in this last year, we have a new normal, right? But we have grief because of our normal has changed. Our children are born with bright eyes, but grief begins in childhood, and those stones, they're collected, put into that backpack. And the eyes of our children are often dimmed by the age of 15. And when I learned that, that made me sad. So 15, if you imagine, is about going into high school. So somewhere by the time middle school happens, the light has been dimmed in our children's eyes. That's really sad to me. But it does make sense, when you look back on your own middle school years, or of stories with your own kids now, or friends and family, you hear about things that happened in middle school. There's many reasons that that grief is misunderstood. These are a few of the myths that exist that we've been taught: to not feel bad, to replace the loss, to grieve alone. So grieving alone is something we were taught. It goes against a lot of our nature, but also in this last year, when we were isolated, then it was imposed upon us, which takes on a whole other different layer. There's be strong. And that one can sometimes be tricky for people because we hear all the time, let's be strong, you're strong, or be strong, and it's important to be strong. And there is something to be said for that, because we want to be able to function and be productive in life. And but when you're being strong at the expense of not honoring how you actually feel, that's where the distraction comes in. And again, that's another layer of disconnect with self. And so if you imagine that as children, we cannot feel our feelings except the happy ones. So we have to be strong. We wipe off those tears, get up, get going. So that disconnect from self has been happening since many, many years ago for some of us. Keeping busy is one. And it just takes time. That's another myth that you hear all the time. And unfortunately, time does help, but it only helps in changing our how we are experiencing it. It doesn't actually help process the emotion out of our bodies. Some in this last year, I'm going to say a few statements that you might have heard or your kids might have heard. Don't feel bad, at least you weren't sick. Or why are you afraid about money? At least your spouse still has a job. At least you're younger, so you might be better off. It's so sad he died, but he was old and lived a full life. So we hear these types of things, these intellectual things that don't really help our hearts. And we learn that we need to stuff our sad feelings into our backpacks and only share those positive ones. Another reason that our grief is so misunderstood is that we from childhood learn to engage in behavior that helps to numb us out. And we call those behaviors STIRBs, short-term energy relieving behaviors. And as you see here, there's so many things. And it can be eating more, eating less. I mean, you go through the whole gamut, but if you're looking at children, cutting is an issue. Vaping is something that is prevalent in our children, and the vaping's beginning in middle school, if not before. So you see all of these: alcohol, sleep disturbances, risk taking, violence, anger, drugs, whether it's off the street or maybe prescription drugs. But I don't know if you see at the very bottom, there's one called suicide. It's kind of strange to think of it as a STIRB, as a short-term energy relieving behavior, but some of our young people are thinking about this. They're thinking about getting out of pain. They maybe they see it as long-term, but I can tell you in the short term, they need to stop hurting and they don't know what to do. And so some of them are looking into that, and some have succeeded. And I think it's something that we can actually make a difference in their lives, and help guide them away from those types of behaviors, give them some relief from what they're feeling. And this one, the Academy Award recovery. Who all here has answered, I'm fine, right? How are you? I'm fine. I don't like the response. I know that sometimes you just don't, it ends a conversation, but and sometimes it's just you don't want to say more, so we say I'm fine. We've been taught to say I'm fine, but if you think about fine representing, I have feelings inside that I'm not expressing, then next time, maybe when you answer I'm fine or you hear it, you'll begin to question yourself or question the person, and just take a moment, if you have the time and inclination, to go a little bit deeper. Well, tell me really how you're doing. What's going on? What's going on today? Many of us have heard, suck it up, don't be a sissy. Don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. Or put your big girl panties on and more. And kids are like sponges. They've learned this from us, and we've learned it from our parents and society, teachers and caregivers. By the age of 2 to 3, we have already taken on 50% of our belief system for processing emotion. And that's so you think that those are those pre-verbal years that I was talking about. And so sometimes people think, my kids are doing okay, they're young, they're not affected. But is that true? Because, I don't know how the adults have been around them. Maybe the adults have not been affected. Maybe they've done all the right things to process their emotions. But I think a lot of times that is not the case. And again, by ages 12 to 15, they've lost those bright eyes. These things have become our belief system, labeled as BS. We hold tightly to our beliefs, even though they really don't work all the time, and we resist strongly anyone who tries to tell us differently. These beliefs can be generational, and in fact, I think many times it is, and maybe I could even say all the time, until there's a conscious choice made to make a change. And part of what what feeds me in my work is being able to help people bring awareness into these generational patterns and to honor the family and to honor the relationships, but to do what it takes to shift those patterns, because it can happen. We have that in our power to shift patterns. We can make a difference in our family tree, and it's possible. And it isn't that hard. So that's really why I do what I do. So you're here today because of your children and their grief, and what can you do to help them? Because their rocks are our rocks, or we wouldn't be here. And if we talk a little bit more about your grief, if we just look at the last year, you may have experienced changes on the job, grief in the job. Maybe you were unable to work, or you lost your job entirely or had to change. Likely you've experienced grief within your community. Certainly, we've all felt grief, no matter what. All of us have felt grief through the news. And then at home, you may be having changes as well. Some of you may be in that generation where you're caring for or concerned about your parents, and also caring for your children. There are ways that we can relieve the grief we carry. And relief comes by learning to make small positive changes in our attitudes and our behaviors. Getting better is an ongoing process, and it comes sooner with positive actions and with appropriate support. There are ways. This is probably what you're here for, is this screen right here. There are ways to relieve our children's grief. We can validate and acknowledge the grief or trauma. We can avoid that myth statement that validates and instead validate what they're going through by saying that by starting with, I can't imagine what you're feeling, how you're experiencing, what it must feel like to not be able to have your graduation. Because the thing is that we know what we think it would be like to not be able to have our graduation or any of the other events, right? Or, we might imagine what it might be like if our child's father died when but if we do not know exactly what they're going through, because we are all different, we are all unique. And so every one of us feels our grief at 100%. And no one knows exactly what we're going through. But we can help our children to identify and name the loss. The tangible ones, meaning the ones you can clearly identify, if there was a death, if there was a divorce, if there was, you know, um, a breakup or something like that. That's very tangible, very clearly identifiable. And then the intangible ones are the ones we talked about, the loss of safety, the loss of identity, the loss of protection, the hopes, dreams, expectations, the loss of having a normal world. And then you may help them name their feelings, because they will tell you the story, but what they want you to hear is how they're feeling. It's important. And it's important for it to be okay. And that can be challenging for us parents who want our children not to hurt. But we need to allow them to express those sad and hurtful feelings. So as you allow them to use their voice, what you can do is step into that space. It's, you hear it a lot, holding space. You can hold space for your children. You can listen and imagine yourself being a heart with 2 ears and just listen. You can also help them make choices, and you can also help them identify the stimuli that is leading to those stirbs that they're experiencing. Instead of telling your child not to feel bad, that a loss can be replaced, that they need to be strong and keep busy, and that grief just takes time, you can help them to develop some better communication tools. And here are 6 tips. And I'm happy to send these 2 lists to you after the webinar is over. So again, if you listen with your heart and not your head, recognizing that grief is emotional and not intellectual, and to remember that you are the adult and they are learning from you and they are watching you and they respect you. And if you can go first in expressing how you feel. So it's not from a place of comparison. It's not from a place of, well, when I was in high school or when I was in middle school, I did XYZ. But maybe it's like when we learned that we were in a pandemic and we were all supposed to not leave our homes. You could say, I was really scared and I didn't know what to expect. And I've never experienced this, whatever it was you were feeling, because sometimes we protect our children from our feelings because we think we have to be strong for them. And you do, but strength can come from emotional vulnerability. And that's a more powerful strength than any other strength. And that part of remembering that each child is unique and each child has a unique relationship to the loss event. And so if you have a family of 5 and you're married, so there's 7 of you in your household, you all get the news on the same day about the pandemic, you are all 7 going to have a totally different experience of even just that moment of learning about being told to stay home. then if we can remember to be patient and to never tell our children, don't feel sad and don't feel scared, even though I know that's what one that's the natural thing to come out of our mouths, but their ability to successfully deal with emotional sadness is the survival skill that they will need throughout the rest of their lives. And I see that there are two ways we can really improve our children's lives. And one is the grief recovery method, to learn tools to complete your own grief. So you may have, as we've been talking here, you may have realized you have some things that have happened in your life that are still affecting you. And so you being interested in looking at your own situation so that you can process what needs to be processed so you can show up just as you as a better parent. That's one approach. And we learn in three ways. We learn by seeing, hearing, and doing. And this process involves storytelling. And the reason is because our story is important. What's happened to us is important. Honoring who we are and just reflecting on the life that we've had and the loss that we've had. There's also, a lot of times the loss feels very heavy, but there's also threads, because nothing is all just negative. There's also threads of beauty weaved throughout. And it is a time where you really begin to develop that relationship with yourself on a level that's it just happens. Actually, you don't have to like specifically work on yourself, but going through this process you're able to allow yourself to come out, which it's just such a beautiful experience. This process allows you to give voice to undelivered communications. And it's also a very systematic approach, so it helps you to organize your thoughts and your feelings. And the second approach is the class that I talked about earlier, helping children with loss. And this is for adults to learn better ways to hold space for their children so that their children can process, and so that the adults know how. I mean, once we know how, it's easy to then guide our children through, to help our children give voice to the undelivered communications from the hurts that they've experienced. And again, I've said it a couple of times, but it really is an emotional survival technique that they can use for the rest of their lives. And it is a wonderful gift because their emotional health and well-being, their ability to be resilient is in their own hands for the rest of their lives. Because once they know how to use these tools, then they are able to use them and they do not have to go seek outside help. Although, on occasion they're going to want outside help, but they're not going to, most of the time they'll be able to handle things on their own. So I just will give you a quick little summary here, and then I will stop the recording and then we can open up for questions. So both avenues really do allow me to help you support your children. And I can tell you all that I passed along to my own children the inability to process emotion. And I treated my oldest like she was broken, like I needed to fix her for years. Like I have had to work on that because I felt heaviness in my heart. I'll say that at the very least, heaviness in my heart for what I had put her through, because I didn't know better. I didn't, and through not knowing better, I hurt her. But since I have started to use these new tools and to show up differently in her life and to allow her experience to be real, so what if she feels things strongly? It's okay. So what if you know, she, I don't know, has issues with friendships or feels the losses? It's okay. How she is perfectly okay. And once I shifted, she was able to shift, and our relationship has deepened. Her ability to be happy has deepened. Her ability to be productive out in the world, she is just flourishing. And so there's hope. There's, it's never too late. Even if, like, I'd gone, I don't know, at least 10 years of her life not having better tools. So I just offer that as some hope for anyone who may be experiencing a tough time with their kids.